welcome to Tech presented by Kaizen, where we will explore common cleaning questions and answers. This session has been pre-recorded and will include additional FAQs related to this specific topic at the end of the presentation. We hope it is 15 minutes well spent. Let's get started. I would like to introduce Kaizen's own Chelsea Jewell.
Thanks, William, and thanks everybody for taking some time to learn about labels. So today we're going to take a look into label compatibility. More specifically, how are they affected? So our intro here, we're going to go over the use of labels, why test them, our testing protocol, sample preparation, inspection and grading, and variables within the process. So first and foremost, why are we talking about stickers or labels? Tracking and traceability are the main reasons we come across labels on circuit boards or any part really. You know, further down the line, if there's issues that something has to be brought back and you can go through the traceability of this label and look at what factors environmentally could have happened along the way. Identification, understanding what that specific part is or board is. And then specific identification steps in the manufacturing process. If there's a different reflow that this one goes through or a different wash process, all of these can be identified with labels. So why test them? Overall, we've seen an increased demand wanting the data for label compatibility. We've dug into this over probably the last decade and done a lot of research on our specific cleaners and how labels react in a wash process. It also helps with troubleshooting potential problems prior to starting that process. So if a customer has an existing label that they're looking to use, we can look into our database or run that testing and see any potential problems that could occur in that process. And then understanding the impact of a process change. If something deviates, a label shifts when they're placing it on a board or they're looking at changing a chemistry, we can see how that all will be affected later on. So taking a look at our testing protocol, starting out with wash concentration. Typically, we run anywhere from 4 to 5 different products in our label compatibility. Our normal products cleaning, no cleans, and rosin-based fluxes, we're normally at 15%. For any water soluble, we run those at 10%. This is a little bit on the higher end, hoping to see how those harsher conditions affect the label. All of our testing is run at 150 degrees, and then it goes through 4 wash passes through the inline. We have our inline set up spray bar wise with our intermix. So this is a combination of fan bars and coherent bars. And what that does is it simulates a harsher environment as far as a flooding action from the fans and a really higher pressure from the coherents going through those. We also do a reflow condition versus a non-reflow condition. And then looking at our exposure times, um, one pass through the inline equals 7.5 minutes of just wash exposure. So by the time we get to that fourth pass, those labels have seen up to 30 minutes through the wash solution in our machine. Talking about sample prep. So all of our labels come to us that are die cut. So they are able to peel off the backing very easily rather than something that's flush cut to the liner. This helps reduce the amount of manual manipulation we have to do to get the labels off the backing. So we take normally tweezers and peel the label off with those and use gloved hands to place them on the board. We're trying to reduce any contact that a human hand would have with this. We don't have a label applier, so this is the closest we found to replicate that. One test board from each set is reflowed through our oven, so we have both a reflowed and non-reflowed condition of that label. And you can see in this image that there's 3 of every label. We run all of our testing in triplicate, so if there happens to be a quirk with one label, you have more data points to see how that label really responds through the wash process. And then typically we take images before and after testing of each board. Let's get into inspection. So this is kind of our score chart and how we grade everything. Looking at the layers of a label, you have your liner and the backing paper. There's an adhesive and then you have a ribbon. So each of these can be combined into different types of labels and different combinations to test. Most of the time we have a series that has the same ribbon over and over with different adhesives or vice versa to really understand how this one responds versus another one in the process. So first and foremost, we look at ink adherence. So our score of 1 means that the label looks pristine, there's no peeling or flaking or any types of changes to the ink surface. And as we move, we have, slight dulling or moderate dulling. Once we get to about a 4, it becomes very difficult to read the labels most of the time. So at that point, we would deem that combination is no longer a passing label. And then we look at label adherence. So full adherence is the best score. We've had no effect. Labels firmly stuck to the surface of the board. You 2, you can start to see some peeling at the edges. And then at a 3, we've got about 25% of the label is coming off the surface. Most of the time, that's when we start to fail a label because you're seeing with subsequent washes that more and more peelings occur. For this, normally we have a single board that's ran for each wash process rather than taking one board and running it through the machine 4 times and taking pictures in between. What we found is it's very telling to actually have the physical label there with a peeling is hard to tell in a picture versus having it a physical label there. Let's get into grading. We've got a couple examples here for you of how a set of labels can look before and after reflow, and then going through the machine through those 4 passes. So looking at our non-reflow conditions, you can see the first 2 labels, the matte 717 and the rib 140. As you go to each wash pass, the ink is starting to dull until the third wash pass to where it's completely removed. So, and then looking at the next one, this originally had an ink on there, but it was gone after the first wash process. And then looking further down in our non-reflow conditions, you've got your MAP 717 and then the rib 104. You don't see any dulling to the ink, and everything remains through each of the 4 wash processes. So this would be considered a pass for a label in a non-reflowed condition. Then looking at the reflowed and kind of signifying why we do this in both conditions, you can see that MAT 717 or 711 that passed in a non-reflowed condition isn't meant to be reflowed. So that would be documented within our compatibility results that this is something that the label should be applied after going through a reflow process. Working our way back up, the MAT 717, the ink and the 10 or 140 remain throughout the entire wash pass once it's reflowed. And what this is telling us is that label is meant to be reflowed. So it needs that extra time in the reflow oven to set up the ink so it's ready and strong enough to make it through the wash process. So overall, looking at this, no one label would be recommended for both the reflowed and non-reflowed conditions with what we're seeing in these images. Look at a recommended label. So this has gone through the same process as the labels in the previous slide, and what you're seeing in our non-reflow condition, the labels are adhered well, you're not seeing any peeling or flaking at the edges. The ink is legible through each of the wash processes. You haven't seen any dulling, any changes. Once we go to the reflow condition, you're seeing the same. Overall, this would be a complete pass in both reflowed and non-reflowed conditions. So once we get into grading, this is kind of what our software looks like when we're entering grades. You have your non-reflow condition on the left, and going through that up until the 4th wash process, you're starting to see that the adhesive is starting to peel. So that's hitting that 25% has been removed or is lifted from the surface of the board and is no longer recommended at 4 wash processes. Most processes that we see don't require 4 wash processes. So when we give a recommendation, it's based on wash pass 1 through 3. We just throw in that extra one to really see how far we can push the labels. And then looking at our reflow conditions, this label is not recommended mostly because what we see in pass 3 with our score of 6 in the ink and 6 in the adhesive, That thing is that label was completely removed at that point. And then our third label on Wash Pass 3, we have the same issue where it's starting to peel up. So that pushed it into a realm that it wouldn't be recommended fully with that combination of products. This data is all available, and what we can see, if you're not running a label for 3 passes, we can kind of wheel it down and show you, if you have this label, yes, it can most likely make it through this amount of washes, but it starts to get a little iffy if it'll remain after so many. Let's look at some variables within the process. Surface adhesion. If the sticker's not fully stuck to the board, it's not going to stay through the wash process. This can be impacted by how the labels are handled. If somebody is applying them and oh no, it's crooked and you got to fix it and you're peeling it off the board and back on, that can cause adhesion issues. If there's contamination already on the board and you're trying to put a label over it, that can cause improper adhesion. And then just a poor match between the adhesive and the substrate that you're putting it on. It's trying to stick saran wrap to plastic sometimes. It doesn't always work. So having that good combination always helps. And then application method. Like we talked about, if you're pulling that sticker or the label on and off, it's gonna fail sooner than expected. There are all kinds of methods to help apply labels without manual applications, but if that's what's required, tweezers are always a great option to help place those. And then reflowed versus non-reflowed. If something in a process changes and you have to move a label application before the reflow, and you're not sure how that's going to affect it, it's always good to test beforehand. And then temperature. Some of the labels are designed to stay in a certain bandwidth when it comes to temperature. Making sure you know what those boundaries are is very critical as well. To wrap it up, what we're looking at, labels are a very important part of the manufacturing process, especially when something comes in and you have to do failure analysis and look at that to see what that board has experienced in the manufacturing process, going through that, being able to work your way back to find possible anomalies that could cause that failure. And we want to make sure that that traceability is still there through the wash process. And it has to be compatible with it. If you find everything was running great and then, a ribbon changed and suddenly you no longer have ink going through after the wash process, letting us know that you need that data or possible recommendations are always a possibility. The exposure testing we do here can determine what parameters you can kind of stay in. Over the last decade, I mean, we've done thousands and thousands of label testing, so we have all the data here and can help you out if you need it. By getting into some frequently asked questions about this, how does an inline wash process correlate to other types of washers? So if you have a batch washer or you're looking at brain immersion or one of those, what we found is the inline is typically a good indicator of those other wash processes. As long as you're staying within normal processing boundaries, once you start getting into really long wash cycles, sometimes that can deviate a little bit. And then, is my current label compatible with a wash process? Something we've had customers where they were not not washing their boards and then suddenly started washing them and had to change course, and had issues with their label, letting us know what changes are happening. We can help guide that process if needed. And then how long does testing normally take if you send a label in? Normally, we like to say about 2 to 3 weeks. It depends on what process you're looking at, how many labels you're looking at, and then if you're looking at a single chemistry or multiple. But normally that 2 to 3 week range is where we like to stay. And then how does a different substrate change compatibility? This can drastically change how well something is adhered. Like we talked about, if there's thermal issues, so if you're putting a label on a metal material that's not designed to be reflowed, technically, as the metal heats up going through that wash process, it could help release that adhesive or it could cure it further. It really does change how that compatibility is. based on different substrates. And with that, I'm going to kick it back to William. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chelsea, and thank you all for watching this Tech to Tech session. If you would like to discuss this topic further or have any questions not answered in the session, please contact your local Kaizen regional manager or send an email to tech@kaizen.com, and we will have someone follow up with you as soon as possible. Do you want to have exclusive access to future content sent directly to your inbox, or do you know someone who would benefit from these sessions? If the answer is yes, just go to tech2tech.kaizen.com and fill out the subscription form. And if you like this video, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms for more expert cleaning content.